So, folks, we've been dealing with the disaster of the new Biden administration for, 3 weeks now, and it's already an abomination. Between the executive orders, the open borders advocacy, the attacks on everything from our economy to basic stability, and the fostering of racial division in this country, it's just incredible how much damage someone can do in 3 weeks. No, not that one. That's the other. Oh, okay. Sorry. So I wanted to cover this because the Biden administration yesterday decided it would be a good idea, again, to start committing to racial equity. Not equality. They've changed the word to equity now. Now, ladies and gentlemen, they do this all the time. They throw out a term like racial equity because they know no one's going to be on the other side of that. Like, who doesn't want equity and equality? That's not exactly what they're doing. Again, they're actually promoting racial division in the country. And I want to show you some video by Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman, and how when government tries to enforce equity, air quotes, or equality, what they're actually doing is treating people unequally with the force of government behind it. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'll explain it. Here's the article first by Jason Riley. Progressives put the racial equity squeeze on Biden. The left wants a spoils system on steroids. If the president gives it to them, heaven help us, by the great Jason Riley, who has a documentary out about the great Thomas Sowell, I might add. There'll be an article about it in the show notes today from Legal Insurrection. Anything you can watch from Thomas Sowell is terrific. Here's Jason Riley from the piece. It's a great one, again, about how government, especially Biden, pushing for racial equity and equality is really pushing for racial inequality and more division. Quote, Riley says, similarly, blacks were joining the middle-class professions at a much faster pace in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s than they would have after affirmative action programs were implemented in the 1970s. In fact, we now have evidence that suggests racial preferences have not only been ineffective in helping the black poor, but also counterproductive. After the University of California system ended race-conscious admissions policies in 1996, black and Hispanic graduation rates rose dramatically. So Riley's premise, and what I like about this article, is that Biden's move back from the Martin Luther King vision of a society blind to race and judging people on character, the Biden vision where we judge people on race and ignore their character, will actually lead to more division and more damage in the minority community. Now, this is not an easy idea to digest. One, because liberals live in a bubble, and secondly, because they use sound bites like, hey, we're for racial equality. Who's not? Who is not? The question is, how do we get there? You saying it, putting a label on it, doesn't mean that's what you're actually doing by government processes, which are actually creating more division. What do I mean? Watch this brilliant clip by a living legend in every sense of the word today, Mr. Thomas Sowell. Here's a clip from him. I think this is back in the 70s. He's on a panel with Milton Friedman and other great intellects of the time, and also with Francis Fox Piven, not one of the great intellects of our time, from the Cloward-Piven destruction model. He's challenging Francis Fox Piven on the idea that government processes can somehow make everyone equal. Well, that's really weird because there's always going to be inequality of effort, regardless of race. You can have some people who want to work harder, some people don't want to work at all. So how do you make them all equal without treating them unequally? You'd have to take from the guy who works hard and give to the guy, regardless of race, who doesn't work hard. So he makes the point here that government processes and the results you want, which we all want, racial equality, of course we all want that. The processes, though, are different. And maybe they're counterproductive. Check this out.
I think we're talking at cross purposes. On the one hand, we're talking about results that we're hoping for. On the other hand, we're talking about processes that we're setting in motion. You're saying, should we hope for certain kinds of lessening of inequality and so on? The real question, the political question is, shall we set in motion certain processes because we hope for that? And do those processes enhance or reduce freedom? And I think the argument that Milton is making, certainly the argument that I would make, is that the attempt at doing these things, and it doesn't really matter, it's a complete straw man to talk about absolute inequality. No, not
yes,
at all.
Yes, it is,
no.
absolutely. Throughout the film, this is the straw man he brings up in order to say how ridiculous to have absolute equality. And then he goes on to say how ridiculous to have
my whole point is
homogenization as well.
As a result, you see, that you set up processes whose end result may not be any more or less inequality than exists now, but the question is, those processes may indeed reduce freedom greatly.
Demands one of the greatest intellects of our time. You know me, I don't get starstruck by anyone. I just don't care. There's probably two people who I'd get starstruck by. Don Mattingly, the old first baseman for the Yankees, who I just adored growing up. The hitman, Don Mattingly. And Thomas Sowell. Talk about two totally different first basemen for the Yankees and Thomas Sowell. Really, I probably wouldn't know what to say because my life has been changed by Thomas Sowell. His books, Vision of the Anointed, Conflict of Visions, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. They're life-changing books. You can't read them and still be a liberal. Not that I ever was a liberal, but, I was more of an independent in college. You buy the liberal line, you toe left in college. And then as I get out and started to educate myself with Thomas Sowell's books and Milton Friedman's works, I started to realize everything I believed about leftism was a myth. It's a farce, backed up by real data and evidence in the real world. Like government efforts to force inequality have actually made minority groups more unequal. That's a fact. So what Sowell's talking about here, and the point he makes, which is absolutely brilliant, is claiming you want a goal that we all believe in, right? Racial equality, hopefully, right? We all believe in that. I know I do. We'd all like to see equality. It's a great thing to try to achieve, a society where everybody can get to some point of prosperity. That's a terrific goal. That is not the same thing as advocating for processes that are causing the opposite effect. Rewind the tape and you'll hear him again say the same thing. I'll give you an example of it. I saw in today's Wall Street Journal of exactly, because sometimes you got to put your eyes on something to make it real using analogies and stories. An article from today's Wall Street Journal that shows exactly what he's talking about. How you can claim you're a liberal, you want racial equality, and then try to enact in policies which do the exact opposite. Wall Street Journal opinion today. Equity for Asian Americans in practice. Biden bars the phrase Wuhan virus, but favors racial preferences at Yale. Isn't that weird, folks? So weird, right? But obviously dripping with sarcasm from every pore in my body. So liberals, again, claim they want racial equity and racial equality. But what's weird is there was a very solid legal case against Yale University that our United States government was behind, by the way, that Yale was discriminating. Allegations, of course. Yale's free to defend itself. I am an advocate for both, for people's say in court. But that Yale was alleged to be discriminating against Asians. And the evidence was there that Asian Americans had to score on their SATs and college entrance exams substantially higher than both white and black Americans to get into Yale, and other sorts of allegations like that. The numbers were pretty devastating. Biden dropped that case. I wonder why. I'm just asking you from common sense terms, right? In a race-neutral society where we judge people based on character, which is what I thought we wanted. It's certainly what I want. In a race-neutral society, why is it that Asian Americans have to work substantially harder to get the same opportunities as black and white Americans? Well, why is that? Well, the only real answer when you get through all the focus point tested talking points that these universities threw out there to try and logic this out, the only real answer is, well, we have too many Asians. I have too many Asians. That sounds awfully racist and discriminatory. That's because it is. So in your efforts to use government policy, affirmative action and others, to promote minority groups, black and Hispanic Americans, to get into colleges, you're actually treating Asian Americans, another minority group, in a discriminatory, unequal fashion. Does that sound fair to you? Does that sound fair to you? That's what Sol is talking about. How Biden's push now for this equity agenda, and it's going to be everywhere. They're going to measure the number of Black and Hispanic Americans in housing and middle-class communities and colleges, all going to be about disparate impact, all a numbers game, as if anybody was randomly assigned to a neighborhood, and a neighborhood must be racist if enough Hispanic Americans don't live there. Maybe they just don't want to live there. Have you ever asked them? No, we don't want to ask them because it would refute our point. Because discrimination in housing, thankfully, is already illegal based on race, ethnicity, country of origin. It's already illegal. So why aren't there mass complaints about discrimination? Because they can't find mass discrimination, so they have to make it up. Well, we're doing a math calculation. There are not enough Black residents in this community, not enough Hispanic residents in this community, too many Asians in this college. Based on what? And what's interesting is when you get actual complaints, like by Asian Americans, that they can't get into good schools because there's a de facto Asian quota, all of a sudden Biden wants to ignore it. Really weird. How the processes Biden is pushing now, as Sol would have said, was alluding to in that, that's from decades ago. The processes are actually pushing discrimination and unequal treatment.